Thank you all. Thank you all so much for being here this evening. As Shannon mentioned, I'm Nathaniel Stinnett. I'm the founder and executive director of the Environmental Voter Project. And I am enormously grateful that you are taking this time out of your evening to show your support for our work, or to learn about our work, or at least to heed the call of a member of our host committee who said, oh, come on, you need to come and find out about this group. We're enormously grateful to you for this. We have a quick event tonight, and we're going to try to keep to that schedule and respect your time. And so please bear with me if there are some things that I just breeze over. That's by design. I'm not going to go into enormous detail about every single aspect of the Environmental Voter Project's work. That is not appropriate for a 30-minute session. But as Shannon mentioned, you can ask questions in the chat, and we also have an optional Q&A session afterwards. I want to start by thanking the members of our host committee. As a nonprofit, we need to raise money. And there are a lot of people who have been enormously generous, both financially, but also with their time, to help us throw this event and have it be very successful and reach out to voters. Please accept all of our thanks. And to those of you who are here tonight, because one of these people strong-armed you or virtually strong-armed you to show up, thank you to all of you as well. So thank you to all of these people. As you see, it's a very long list, and that's outstanding. Thank you for making tonight already such a success. All right, in a nutshell, what does the Environmental Voter Project do? We identify non-voting environmentalists and then turn them into better voters. That's what we do. We don't endorse candidates. We don't lobby for particular policies. We don't even try to persuade people to care more about climate or the environment. A good way to think of us is we're not in the mind-changing or opinion-changing business. We are solely in the behavior-changing business. We find people who already care deeply about climate and the environment, and then we make behavioral interventions to turn them into better voters. Now, why do we do that? Well, because one of the biggest reasons we can't get consistently good environmental leadership and policymaking in this country, not just at the federal level, but also at the state and local level, is this one right here. There just aren't enough voters who care deeply about climate and the environment. And I could have showed you any one of a million polls, and they would tell the same story. And that is, we're lucky if climate and the environment break into the second or third tier, but they're never in the first tier. Man, if I were showing you polls of people who were just listing their #1 priority, we'd be lucky if 3 or 4 or 5% listed climate and the environment. And this is a big problem. It's a big problem that doesn't get talked about enough in the climate and environmental movements, because whether you vote or not is public record. And if there's one thing we all know about politicians is, boy, do they like to win elections, don't they? And so whose priorities do you think they're going to pay attention to? Are they going to pay attention to the climate voters who make up a really small portion of the electorate? Or are they going to pay attention to the voters who care about different issues, who are much closer to the top? This is a big problem in the environmental movement right now, because there just aren't enough voters to drive policymaking. There just aren't. But the reason we started the Environmental Voter Project actually grows from this data that you see here. Because it turns out the reason you only see 3 or 4% of voters list climate as their top priority, and only 14% if you expand it to their top 3 priorities, is not actually because too few Americans care about these issues. It turns out, in fact, that there are tens of millions of Americans who care so deeply about climate and the environment that it's their #1 priority. So why aren't they showing up in polls like this of likely or actual voters? Well, it turns out there's one very good reason, and that is environmentalists just aren't voting. It turns out that the environmental movement doesn't have a persuasion problem as much as we have a turnout problem. And this is why the Environmental Voter Project focuses on the things that we do. What we care about are these people right here. What you're looking at is unlikely to vote environmentalists who are already registered, by the way, in each of these states. And I'll get into in a little bit how we're able to identify them, but these people are already registered to vote, and they list climate or the environment as their #1 priority, and they've never voted in a midterm election ever. These are huge numbers in important states. This is an opportunity because we live in a moment in time where changing people's minds is hard and changing their opinions is hard, but changing their behavior is a little bit easier. And when we expand out to the entire national stage, man, I mean, we identified over 12 million environmentalists who didn't vote in the last midterms, over 8 million who skipped the presidential election last year. These are huge numbers, but also huge opportunities. And so this is why at the Environmental Voter Project, we really just focus on these 3 things. 1, we use data science to build predictive models. And what these models allow us to do is individually identify all of these super environmentalists who have awful voting histories. The second thing that we do is once we find these people who don't need their minds changed, they just need their behavior changed, well, that frees us up to take advantage of cutting-edge behavioral science and only deliver messages that are focused on turning these people into better voters. We don't need to waste our time doing the hard, expensive stuff. We're just trying to get them to care about this issue. They're already there. And then the third thing is habit reinforcement. A lot of people talk about how important it is to work year-round on voter mobilization. We actually do it. We use every election as an opportunity to change behavior rather than sitting on our hands and just talking to voters once every 2 years. This means that we are able to, in the creepiest sense imaginable, individually identify who these voters are, often by name and street address. We can then deliver these behavioral science-informed messages by canvassing and calling and texting and delivering digital ads and direct mail, all with rigorously tested messaging that is just designed to get these people to vote. Hell, we don't even need to talk about climate or the environment. If talking about chocolate chip cookies is the best way to get these people to vote, we're going to talk about chocolate chip cookies. And as just an example from 2020, from last year, we really are serious about working year-round. We don't keep our powder dry for the big, sexy elections. Not that those elections aren't important, they're very important. But if you truly care about changing people's behavior, you can't just talk to them once every 2 years. You need to talk to them whenever there's an election. And so last year, we made tens of millions of these behavioral science-informed voter contacts. We ended up getting great results. We don't have too much time, but I just want to tell you what you're looking at here. These are the results of randomized control trials. What that means is these isolate what our sole impact was on turnout among these non-voting environmentalists while controlling for all outside variables. $14 billion were spent last year, and the little old Environmental Voter Project was responsible for increasing turnout 1.8 percentage points in Pennsylvania among our targets. That's a big deal. And we're enormously proud of all the people on this call who helped make that happen. Even more important is our cumulative impact, because this is what our true goal is, growing the electorate over time. And in the 5 years since we launched in these 12 states that you see here, we have turned 730,000 low propensity environmental voters into consistent voters who have voted in their most recent federal, state, and even local election. These are super, super, super voters. Obviously, we care about impact. Obviously, we care about results, but we're also enormously grateful and excited about this community that we've created. A lot of the ways that we contact these voters are through volunteers, and our volunteers are enormously well trained. They are enormously dedicated. Many of you are on this call, and we love getting this unsolicited feedback about how impactful you find this work. very quickly because I'm running out of time. And I told everybody else that they had to abide by their time limit. So I need to. We are working in these 17 states. These are the 17 states where we have individually identified these non-voting environmentalists, and we're using behavioral science informed messaging to get them to vote. Every election matters. In 2021, an odd year, we are using all of these elections as a way to increase people's voting behavior. We've already been active in over 600 elections. We have already been able to, in randomized control trials, increase turnout in places like San Antonio and Pennsylvania and Virginia. And I know everybody has their eyes on the Virginia gubernatorial and statewide that's coming up. And just 5 days into early voting, we know that 1,578 of the people we're targeting, who by definition aren't supposed to vote, have already had their ballots counted. This is how powerful this data science informed and behavioral science informed approach is. So I've already gone 2 minutes over in my section, so I'm going to stop, but I'll just close by saying, please, if any of this sounds important to you, learn more today, stay for the Q&A, but definitely make a donation. The donation link is going to be in the chat over and over and over again today. And I promise you, we will put your funds right in the field and turn them into new voters. So I'll leave you with these numbers right here. If you care about 2022, now is the time to make a down payment. Thank you. Now we are going to move on to learn about the Environmental Voter Project, not in my words, but in your words, the words of our volunteers, the words of some of our donors and supporters. And I hope you enjoy hearing from yourselves about our work.
Climate change is scary. It's scary because it's so big.
We know that a growing number of people care about climate change, but often don't know what they as individuals can do.
And the reality is there's this sliver that Nathaniel and team have identified of folks who care about the environment, but don't vote. And the more we can do to engage those folks, where we can actually change laws around the country at the local, state, and eventually the national level.
But we know we have effective ways of getting those people to the polls, and it can be an easy thing to do, sending a text, making phone calls.
It's rewarding to talk to people. In this case, you talk to a couple of people who weren't going to vote, and they say, yeah, I'm going to vote now. Thanks for reminding me of the way the election coming up.
It's very transparent, the whole model and everything. So I know what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, how it's helping. And I love those occasional meetings where we go over the numbers and statistics and stuff.
What I loved about the work Nathaniel and EVP are doing is we're giving people that really cared and actually thought about environmental issues, the ability to get involved using behavioral science and truly data-driven targeting.
Getting that grassroots movement going and sustaining them to vote in every election instead of just the presidential election.
It worked. Of the 1.8 million or so people targeted by the EVP, almost 1 million of them actually voted for the first time.
We love EVP. We love the work that you all are doing.
It's something I enjoy doing now, so I'm just grateful.
One thing I've really enjoyed about working with EVP is the staff, and I've really enjoyed working with them, and I've learned a lot, and I'm hoping to continue to do that.
And we hope that this may be the gateway to further engagement in the environmental movement.
There's a thing called Archimedes' lever. What is the smallest thing you can do to make the biggest outsized impact? And it's these 8 to 12 million non-active environmentalists who don't vote that Nathaniel and his team can target and activate through behavioral science. It's incredibly nerdy, but the impact is so massive.
I found a way to really feel like I'm making a difference. And I really hope you'll join us to do the same.
Well, I hope that you all take what you just heard really seriously. I hope that you understand that you too could be part of this community of volunteers and activists who, as you can tell, are really involved with EVP for a diverse number of reasons. So thank you to all of you on this call and off this call who are part of that video. Again, I'm EVP's organizing director, so I'm so lucky that I get to work with all of you, and I'm excited to work with many more of you going forward. So speaking of folks that we're really lucky to have on our team, I am thrilled to introduce you all to EVP Advisory Board member Johanna Chao Kreilick. If you don't already know, Ms. Kreilick is the president of the Union of Concerned Scientists, and she has decades of experience combining technical analyses and advocacy to really help find climate solutions. So I'm going to let her tell you a lot more about that, and I hope you're as excited as I am to hear a bit more from Johanna Chao Kreilick.
Thank you so much, Shannon. I'm going to assume, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay. Perfect. Well, I just really want to thank you and Nathaniel and all the organizers. It's such an honor to be here with you tonight. Good afternoon, good evening. And also to join Susan Sue, who will be speaking right after me. I want to give a special shout out to Bill and Kathy, who sort of wear multiple hats like I do, both as sort of a fan and a supporter of EVP, but also of the Union of Concerned Scientists. And, clearly, there are so many shared interests and actually approaches between EVP's vital work and UCS's. We really truly share a mission, not just with our care and concern around climate change and democracy, but really our shared appreciation and use of data science and rigorous independent research to really move the issues forward at scope and scale that we need to. So, I just wanted to take a little time tonight to speak from the perspective as the president of the Union of Concerned Scientists, and give you a few examples that both underscore how vitally important the work is that you're each doing, whether you're a volunteer or a host, or just learning about EVP, how important the work of this organization is, and how hopeful and quite unique EVP's methodologies and approach are. But I actually want to do that through the perspective of sharing a little bit about the work of the Union of Concerned Scientists. So, it goes without saying, I think, that at UCS, science is our superpower. For more than 50 years, we've been putting to work rigorous independent information. We've been putting that information into the hands of people who are working on the world's three interlocking existential threats: climate, democracy, and nuclear security. We are also really committed, like you, like EVP, to really building and mobilizing the next wave and the next generation of public-minded scientists and activists. So as part of our science network, which now exists as over 23,000 technical experts and scientists from around the country who join us for climate advocacy and for resources and workshops that help them connect to each other and become more than the sum of the parts. We're also really working with that group and really want to work with all of you to build a spirit of public service among them. So, I thought I would underscore a couple of the points about just what a dire threat climate change poses to all of us. We heard from Nathaniel recently that there still isn't, it really hasn't hit public consciousness to the extent that of the impacts that are already upon us. I don't think we need an IPCC report to tell us how dire and urgent the moment is. We can feel this all around us. But just to sort of drive the point home a little bit, the latest scientific data shows us that this June and July in the United States were the hottest on record in the contiguous United States. And they were preceded by the 7 hottest years on record worldwide. According to UCS's Killer Heat Report, if emissions continue to rise as they are currently, the next number of days next year, when the heat index, the combination of heat and humidity exceeds 100 degrees Fahrenheit, will more than double by mid-century and increase fourfold by late century. At UCS, our modeling and data science has actually mapped this down to the neighborhood level. So you can actually go to our website and see what kind of temperatures to expect where you and your loved ones live. But of course, extended and more intense heat waves are just one component of the many enormous climate disruptions that we're already facing. So last year, for instance, the US experienced 22 disasters with losses exceeding 1 billion each. 22. That far surpasses the average of about 6 large-scale disasters per year in preceding years. The most recent North Atlantic hurricane season broke records with 30 named storms. And this past year was also a historic year for wildfires. I don't need to tell those of you on the call from California. More than 9,000 fires have already burned 4.4 million acres in California alone. And that's more than all in the state's history. Most scary of all, however, is that scientists are showing that many of these changes are becoming irreversible, especially changes in the ocean, ice sheets, global sea level. And in other words, many of these global changes will effectively be locked in the decades to come if emissions continue to rise, making these next years are really our last chance to mobilize and take action if we want to avoid the inundation of the world's coastal cities by 2300. So I'm going to stop with the stomach-clenching news about the overwhelming hard evidence that the climate impacts are upon us, and because while it is an incredibly grave and urgent moment for the people and the planet, it is such a moment of great clarity that to so many of us, including everyone on this call, we know that it offers us an opportunity of a lifetime. And that is because there is a widespread and growing recognition that the actions we need to take leave us no choice but to think big, act fast, and adopt a multi-solving approach that combines awareness of climate with democratic mobilization. It is so imperative that we swiftly transform a whole set of systems, from energy to transportation and food system. And there is no way we will reach speed, scope, and scale necessary to stem climate catastrophe unless together we work to transform our technical, economic, political, legal, and social systems all at the same time. And we can't possibly do that unless we effectively engage the deepest bench of mobilized citizens and people who care about these issues, both in this country and around the world. So working together, everyone on this call, the volunteers, all of the people that you've reached, UCS and EVP together, we have such an enormous opportunity, not just to address the climate crisis, but to truly step into a more just, equitable, and healthy society. And we at UCS, and I know at EVP, we find that prospect exciting and motivating. So let me give you an example. One of our teams recently set out to chart a path towards both a clean energy and a just future. To do that, we worked in collaboration with an external advisory board that included researchers and academics and activists with years of experience working with marginalized communities. Working close in hand with this advisory board, the UCS team, they considered many options available for shifting how the US might shift to clean energy, and used our sophisticated modeling to explore different pathways through which we could sufficiently reduce carbon emissions. And the team, together with our frontline partners and advisors, arrived at 3 important principles. First, and as you heard from Nathaniel, we absolutely need science to help guide and shape the changes required. The group recognized the importance of anchoring our transition to a low carbon economy in science-based and climate relevant targets and timelines, such as the need to reduce those heat trapping emissions by at least 50%, no later than 2050. Second principle, we need changes that advance climate action, but also at the same time advance equity and justice. These are not mutually exclusive propositions. And in fact, equity and justice are not just outcomes that we must strive for as a moral imperative, but really also key components in the process of how we use to get there. As we think through all the changes that we need as we shape policy recommendations and mobilize advocacy around good policy, we actually need to be tapping people on the front lines and fence lines who have been living and responding to the climate impacts and the climate crises for their lives, and actually have the insights that we need to tap to shape sort of a just transition, a just economy, and just systems along the way. Third principle, we realize that we will only get there through systemic and not incremental change. To rapidly decarbonize our economy in a people-centered way, we're going to need to accelerate unprecedented shift to clean energy, as well as shifts in our society to sustainable consumption, production, development. And we just have to take all of the powerful fossil fuel interests to account and democratize the decision-making process in our systems to get where we need to go. It truly is creative efforts like EVP that are really crucial to helping us get there. So, you know, I want to turn a bit to talking about the connections with democracy, since truly EVP's work hits at the intersection point there. But I also wanted to emphasize, as I think you've heard and witnessed from Nathaniel and Shannon and the volunteers that you've worked with, is that data science and numbers and data isn't enough. We need to put, and we are putting, science into action. To build the world we seek, we need to recognize that Black and Brown communities will be hit with climate impacts first and worst. And as the extraordinary attorney and author of Just Mercy, Brian Stevenson, has said, we need to get proximate on issues of race and injustice. We cannot create justice without getting close to places where injustices prevail. And we're trying to do that through creative partnerships and interaction and putting science into action and into the hands of people in frontline communities around the country. I'm going to give you one more example from the work of my extraordinary colleagues in what we call the Climate Shop, who have really been building and thickening connections with these frontline communities who are experiencing climate impacts both first and worst, but also hold the key to so many of the policy solutions that we seek. One of our partners in Florida that we've worked with for many years called us recently because an important local issue had arisen about the conditions under which the local utility, Florida Power and Light, could just cut off electricity to customers. The call came in to us at around 9:25 a.m. on a Thursday, and by 4 p.m. that afternoon, we had compiled a sheet of recommendations that included how they needed to consider heat thresholds above which a power company would not be allowed to cut off power, and recommended that it also needed to take into account urban heat islands that frequently make it hotter in denser, low-income and Black and Brown communities. And we recommended that the assumptions must be that it is crucial to keep people alive during a killer heat wave, and thus the burden of proof needed to be on the power company to make the case for the discontinuation of power. But here's the really important thing. We could point out to our partners and equip them with the argument and the data down to the neighborhood level, as EVP and Nathaniel are doing, with very precise data that allows sort of a focus of impact, that we've already compiled the documents around anticipated temperature increases under different climate change scenarios. And this really helped them put a whole set of tools in their toolbox. Using data science and modeling, that's just something we would never have been able to do even 5 years ago. So the power of data and scientists and rigorous independent research, both for the modeling and the targeting around political voter mobilization, but also to really help bring tools and insights to communities who really need help with this advocacy, just has never been more promising or more profound. One more example that really touches on work that EVP is doing on voter-related work, and is also, a totally and completely shared ambition and mission by UCS's Center for Science and Democracy. So we too are working on aspects of voting related work, because we realize that the threats to democracy are interconnected to the existential threat of climate, and that voting is at the heart of people power in a functioning democracy, but it's also at the heart of the ability of scientists to work independently and to put their thinking out there in the world. When people are denied the right to vote, it becomes harder for them to advocate for policies that benefit their communities. And attacks on voting rights are not a new problem in the United States, as you know, but they absolutely have grown worse in the past decade. I think it goes without saying, and none of you would be on this call, that our democracy here in the United States is in grave danger. And there's not another organization that I know about working exclusively on mobilizing voters who care about the environment than EVP. So I couldn't say enough about the work of this organization. I feel incredibly proud to be a supporter of both EVP and also to be leading with so many of my incredible colleagues at UCS, work that hits at the intersection of the significant climate change crises, but also the opportunities. And to be doing that in a way that also recognizes that advancing the strong connections between science and democracy is absolutely imperative. And we need science and democracy and science for each one of them to thrive. They both depend on transparency, accountability, and trust. And we will never be able to bring about the changes we so vitally need without science and a strong participatory democracy. So, I would love to go on about the work on disinformation, work that I know that EVP is helping to counteract. But the bottom line is this: we're in this together. I can't thank you enough for allowing me to speak this evening. You know that science is so much more than accumulation of facts. It's an approach to trying to understand the world that requires us to test and experiment and to be open to what the data shows us. And with that in mind, let me leave you with two thoughts. We are in a moment of crisis, but we're also in a profound moment of courage. I couldn't be more honored or encouraged by groups like EVP and by all of the participants and your incredible work on this call. Crisis calls forth courage, and that to me gives me such hope and optimism. We need courage in this urgent moment that leads to action, and we need transformative action that helps motivate us further and shows how much is possible. EVP is on the front line of fixing our democracy by energizing and mobilizing people to engage, and it really truly is why I'm so honored to speak with you. It's a huge moment, but it's also one of many to come. The unprecedented work that you're each doing is so needed, and I'm really excited about continuing to partner with EVP and all of you. Thanks so much for all that you do. UCS plans to be there with you as a partner for all the difficult and exciting work that lies ahead. Thank you. I'll turn it back to you, Shannon.
Thank you so much, Joanna. And thank you all. Again, we are excited to also just now pass it off to another EVP Advisory Board member, Susan Sue, to give us a few more words.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Shannon and Joanna. So I'll be quick, very brief headline here. I am a partner focused on climate tech investing at TOBA, which is an early stage venture capital firm. And I'm also the creator and instructor for a course and community called Climate Change for VCs, whose goal is to activate the broader investor community to channel all of our crazy venture energy towards climate solutions. Separate from my work in climate investing, I cannot think of a better way to spend all of my spare time and energy than as a board advisor to EVP. EVP is not only leaner than many of the so-called lean startups that we invest in, which drives me crazy. Every single dollar goes so far with this tiny team compared to many of the startups that we invest in. But it is just an organization that truly embodies everything good about the world of innovation, meaning data-driven analysis, powering scalable action methods, scalable being the operative word there, that drive real results that we can actually measure, as you saw from Nathaniel's brief presentation. All while filling in a bunch of gaps that private markets just cannot solve for. And as a small aside here, there's some recent analysis that determined that $16 billion went towards climate tech startups in, guess what period? Anybody guess? Just guess in your heads. In just the first half of 2021 alone, $16 billion with a B. Can you imagine what EVP would do with all of that money? I will say also on a more personal note, I want to acknowledge that climate change can be incredibly overwhelming. And one of the best ways to get back up off the ground once you have been floored by yet another climate change stat, like some of what Joanna has shared with us, is to get involved and be a part of the solution. But your time is precious, you don't get it back, and it is really important to be discerning with how you spend your time and your money so that it is going towards the highest leverage, highest impact places and efforts and organizations like EVP as possible. The more that I learn about climate change mitigation, the more that I realize that policy, politics, and innovation all have to work hand in hand. So I'm very proud and humbled and honored to be able to support one of the highest impact organizations doing absolutely mission critical work, not just for climate, but for democracy. So thank you guys for letting me be here.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you so, so much. Thank you, Joanna. Thank you, everyone. We have just one more thing to share here. Gonna try to, there we go, present. And we're going to close. Thank you for bearing with us. It's a little bit later than we wanted to end. That is almost completely my fault because I talk so long, but I will just close with this. Although we would love $16 billion, so you're welcome to donate that. What we need is anywhere from 400, well, we need 400,000 for the end of the year. We can still efficiently spend up to 800,000. Next year, we project, because we have so much data and we can figure this stuff out, that we won't hit a point of diminishing returns until we spend $5.1 million next year. But let's not worry about next year. Let's worry about this year. If you donate now, your money will go right into the field talking to low propensity environmental voters. Why is that important? And why is that important now? One, because climate and environmental policy that is made by local and state officials is really high leverage and really important. But even beyond that, even beyond the importance of state and local policymaking, is the simple fact that voting is not a series of one-off transactions that maybe happens every 2 years. No, it's a potentially habitual behavior. And we need to stop thinking about this only once every 2 years. We need to use every election as a behavioral intervention opportunity to turn these millions of potential foot soldiers into super voters. That's something we've proven we can do. And I hope you realize how important this moment in time is. I just want to quickly close by thanking again all of you who are generously supporting this event as chairs and co-chairs and hosts and co-hosts and advocates. And before we go to the Q&A session, I just want to play you this slide again. Even if you don't buy what I'm saying about the importance of local and state elections, boy, do I know a lot of people on this call are caring about the 2022 midterms. If you imagine yourself 12 months from now worried about turnout in Arizona, well, you got to be worried about the Tucson election that's coming up in 41 days. If you think you're going to be obsessed about turnout in Georgia next year, well, we're trying to mobilize voters in Atlanta who has an open mayoral election. If you're worried about North Carolina, well, we're mobilizing people in Durham right now. Pennsylvania and Texas, believe it or not, have statewide elections. Statewide elections in 41 days. These are enormous opportunities to change the behavior of all of these non-voting environmentalists, people who honestly, in many ways, are just like you and me. They care deeply about these issues. They're just not making their power felt. So thank you, thank you, thank you for bearing with us. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for caring about this work. And before we transition to our Q&A, I do just want to remind you that there is a donation link in the chat. There are also donation links in all of your inboxes. You're probably a little tired of getting them for this event. Please use them. Please use them. Now is the time to make your first down payment on 2022, and now is your time to make a down payment on all of the things that Johanna was talking about. Thank you, Johanna. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, all of the EVP staff and board members and host committee members for this event. We're now going to transition to the Q&A. We totally understand if some of you want to go. It takes a long time to enter in $16 billion into the donation link. But for those who stay with us, I'm really looking forward to the Q&A. Take care, everybody.
Thank you all again so much for being here. We want to respect your time, so we are going to run right into the Q&A. If you can't stay for the Q&A, again, you're welcome to reach out to us in the follow-up email that you get after this event. So don't worry if you have to run, we'll still answer your question. So Nathaniel, I'm going to start right off. We had a whole bunch of questions in the chat throughout, but one that I think that it would be great for you to dig into a little bit more is, could you contextualize some of the numbers for us? So it looks like we have 8 million, 12 million environmentalists who don't vote. What does that mean? How does that relate to things like margins of victory in some of our states?
Yeah, so really, really great question. Let's take the 2020 presidential election that we just had. Highest turnout in, well, I mean, in history. I mean, not just in raw numbers, but percentage numbers as well. So really, really high turnout election, 160 million ballots cast, essentially. 8.1 million registered voters, so already registered voters, who list climate or the environment as their top priority, did not show up in that election. Did not show up. And 160 million, that's the biggest denominator we've ever had. Just enormous turnout for a presidential. And to give you an idea, so that's focusing in on who showed up to vote. And boy, would those 8 million make a big difference. I mean, there were like 200 or 300,000 in Pennsylvania, a state that was decided by a really small margin. There were 110,000 in Arizona, a state that I think, I'm going to totally mess this up, but like 10 or 15,000 margin maybe, I don't know. But let's look at the other side. Let's look at the registered voters who didn't show up. There were about 210 million registered voters. It changes because, as I think we're all aware of, there are lots of voter purges. But what that means is 160 million registered voters voted last fall. Only 50 million did not. 8 million of which were super environmentalists. Yeah, I know it's frustrating, but we should also look at the other side of the coin. This is an enormous opportunity. We live in a moment in time where it's incredibly difficult to get people to change their minds. And what we have here is an opportunity where we don't need to change opinions. We don't need to turn climate deniers into people who accept science. We just need to find the people who are already with us and get them to do this really, really impactful action. So I could go through lots of different elections. We don't necessarily have the time for that. Obviously, the margins are much smaller in midterm elections, much, much smaller in midterm elections. We had the highest turnout of any midterm election going all the way back to 1914, last time we had a midterm. And that was only, I think, like 118 million people voted, 114 million people voted. 12 million environmentalists sat that out. These are huge numbers. They can make a difference.
Excellent. So another question that's come in from a few folks, this is a bit of a two-parter, so I can repeat the second piece if it's helpful. Could you talk just for a minute or two more about how we identify environmentalists? And once we identify them, how do we know that they're actually environmentalists?
Great, great question. And again, I hope you understand we're trying to sort of walk a fine line with this event where it's not a really, really long event where I go over everything that the people who are old hat to EVP already know, but tease you with a little bit of information. And I am totally mindful of the fact that I did not go into a lot of detail on how we identify these voters. So thank you for asking this question. What we do is we build predictive models, and I'm going to explain what that is. But before I do, let me just tell you, this is how all sophisticated political campaigns now target voters. Despite what you might read in articles, campaigns don't target by demographic group anymore. The days of going after soccer moms or NASCAR dads are like long over. Campaigns individually target people based on a score they have assigned them that is frighteningly accurate and tells them lots of different things. If you're starting to get a little creeped out, you're starting to understand what I'm explaining. So let me explain how this works. At the Environmental Voter Project, we identify these environmentalists by doing the following. One, we survey tens of thousands of people. These are huge, huge polls. Let's say we survey 15,000 people in the state of Florida. All we are asking them are two questions. One, is this Joe Smith Sr. or Jr.? Because we have to make sure that the right person answers the phone or answers the online survey or responds to the text. And then two, what's your number one most important political priority? That's the really important question. Let's say out of 15,000 people, we identify 1,500 in Florida who list climate or environmental justice or clean air or clean water. Well, then it's really easy for the data scientists we work with to figure out, what do we know about these people? 1,500 Floridians just told us that climate's their number one priority. What data is there in the voter file? What census data do we have on them? What publicly available behavioral and consumer data is there? We only use publicly available data, but there's a lot of publicly available data out there. And what these data scientists can start do is building really, really rich profiles of who these people are. And I won't get into an enormous amount of detail. And if you go into the news tab on our website, you can see some really in-depth cover articles that were written about this process and learn a little bit more. But very quickly, what we are then able to do is assign a score to every single person in the voter file in, say, Florida, from 0 to 100, telling us not how likely they are to care about climate and the environment, but to literally list it as their number one priority. And again, we're using thousands of data points to do this. We might be able to say, oh, if you live within 2 miles of Orlando and you bought a Volvo between 10 and 12 years ago, and you shop at Abercrombie and Fitch and subscribe to National Geographic, and you've got 2 kids in the public schools, well, holy moly, you've got like a 92.1% chance of listing climate as your top priority. These are really, really precise ways to assign probability scores to environmentalists. Now, does that mean we have 100% certainty how every single individual Floridian feels about climate? No. No, these are probability scores. They are probability models, but they're frighteningly accurate. And what that allows us to do is just only deal with the top. Say, hey, let's only talk to people who score at least an 85, and we know from their public voting records that they're really awful voters, and start delivering our behavioral science-informed messaging. Second part of the question, how are we sure they're environmentalists? We test the first data scientists' work. Once they build these models, we send them out to an outside polling shop and we say, hey, can you test these other guys' work to make sure that it's as accurate as they say it is? So that's how we do it.
Awesome. We just got another really, really excellent question in the chat that I'm really excited for you to answer, Nathaniel. And I'm gonna just ask it directly as they wrote it. So from Nadine and Lewis, I know you just added 5 additional states. What does our medium and long-term planning say about adding additional states? And importantly for today's event, what do we need to do to get there?
Yes, great question. So just so people know what we're talking about here, let me try to pull up this map. Can you guys see the map?
Yes.
Awesome. These are the 17 states that EVP works in. The reason we are in these states is these are the states that have lots of non-voting environmentalists. We need big denominators. It doesn't matter how good we are at turning non-voters into voters if we only have like 20 people to talk to, right? Like that's not going to change policymaking anywhere. So we need to look for states that have lots of non-voting environmentalists. Why do I bring that up, Nadine and Lewis? That limits our planning for the future. There are some states where, to be totally honest, it just doesn't make sense for the environmental voter project to work. It wouldn't be intellectually honest to ask our donors to fund our work there. It wouldn't be honest for us to ask our volunteers to contact voters there. Idaho does not have many non-voting environmentalists. So it kind of doesn't matter how good we are in Idaho because it's not going to change local, state, and federal policymaking. Every time we drop the needle and do research on which states happen to have really large populations of non-voting environmentalists, usually there are anywhere between 20 or 22 states that make a lot of sense. I see that as a natural ceiling to where we would work. But, and I want to be really clear about this, just because we're currently working in these 17 states where we have decided we can have a disproportionate amount of impact does not mean we have even come close to plumbing the depths of what we can do in these states. We did not expand into 17 states because we're rolling in 17 states worth of money. We can go a lot deeper in these states, and that's going to be very, very important to us. I don't think, because I know everybody has 2022 on the brain, I don't think we're going to be expanding into additional states next year. We've bitten off a lot. These are a lot of important states, and they are a lot of potentially impactful states. Are some important states not colored in green? Yeah. Wisconsin's important. Of course it is. Michigan's important. Minnesota's important. There are a lot of important states on here that aren't colored in green. And that's because, to be totally honest with you, if you really care about Wisconsin, your money and your volunteer efforts are better spent on another organization. We want to be really, really honest with our volunteers and donors about where we can have the biggest impact.
Awesome. I hope that all of you got excited about that, excited to dig even deeper into the states that we are doing voter turnout in this year, because we have a lot of work that we can still do. Great. So there were a couple other questions. Let me see. I think we're going to have time probably for just about one more, Nathaniel. So after we talk to our voters, how do we know that what we're doing worked?
Really, really great question. And again, it was by design, but I'll still apologize for it. I know I rushed through this during that presentation. Again, we're trying to fit a lot into 30 minutes. The first thing I'll say is, and if you don't know this, please let it like stick in your head because it's so, so important. Whether you vote or not is public record. And for those of you who don't realize that, please hold it with you because it is quite literally the building block to how all politics is done and how all policy is made. Whether you vote or not is public record. So that means politicians know who they should care about. and know who they should not care about. And they only poll the people who actually vote in the elections. So how do we know that these people we're contacting are actually turning out to vote? Well, the first thing that's important to realize is it's public record. We know who we're contacting, and we can see there's just a public digital outcome, whether they vote or don't vote in the election that we try to mobilize them for. But, and I'm sure this is where the question was trying to get at, we don't just assume that all of the people we communicate with who ended up voting voted because we talked to them. Like, no, of course that's not the case. So we end up measuring our impact in two particular ways. The first is what's called randomized control trials. And I really breezed over this during the presentation, but I'll go into a little bit more depth here. Let's take Georgia as an example. Let's say we've identified 300,000 environmentalists in Georgia who are already registered to vote, but they are unlikely to show up in the midterm election, 300,000. What we do not do is immediately start delivering this behavioral science-informed messaging to all 300,000 of them. Instead, before we talk to a single one of them, we randomly remove about 20%, about 60,000, and set them aside in a control group, and we never talk to them. The remaining 240,000, we text, we call, we canvass, we send digital ads and direct mail, all informed by the latest behavioral science. Then the election happens. Unfortunately, we still don't know how he did. But 2 months later, public voter files are updated and we can see who voted and who didn't vote. And when that happens, we can compare turnout in our control group of low propensity environmental voters that we did not talk to and our treatment group, who are the people we did talk to. And as long as that initial separation process was truly random, and as long as the numbers were big enough to get something called statistical significance, well, what that allows us to do is prove how much we were solely responsible for increasing turnout over our control group. Because even if there were tons of other people and tons of other campaigns who were talking to the same people we were, well, unless they hacked into our system and only knew who was in our treatment group and only spoke to them, well, we're able to control for all that noise. We're able to isolate what just our sole impact was on turnout. And that's really important, not only so we can prove to our volunteers and donors the impacts that we're having, but also so we can learn which messages work well with which subgroups of our voters and which don't. We love to succeed, but we also love to learn from our failures. The second thing, very, very quickly, because I know we're running out of time, we also care about long-term metrics. You'll see in our impact report or on the results tab of our website that we have contacted 7.4 million low propensity environmental voters since we launched 5 years ago. 730,000 of them are now such consistent voters that they're voting in federal, state, and even local elections. That is our true goal, that long-term cumulative impact on the electorate, because that's what's going to drive policymaking. But I want to be very clear here. This second metric, this long-term metric, it does not have the scientific precision of a randomized control trial. We can't say we are solely responsible for making those 730,000 super voters, and if it weren't for EVP, not a single one of them would be voting now. No, we can't say that. It's very hard to run long-term, multi-year randomized control trials. But we're pretty darn responsible. Because I guarantee you there aren't other organizations out there who are going to be talking to voters in close to 800 different elections this year. They're not working year-round to turn non-voters into consistent habitual voters. I realize we have rushed through a whole bunch of stuff tonight. There is always an upside and a downside to having really short events. Hopefully you enjoy the upside. I know you all have special lives to get back to. I'm sorry that we didn't have a chance to get to all of your questions. I'm sorry that you only heard a little bit from such extraordinary speakers like Johanna. Please go and learn more about the Union of Concerned Scientists. Please go and learn more about the Environmental Voter Project. And please, please, please donate. The donation link is in the chat. We will rush these funds right into the field to turn non-voters into voters. We've taken up enough of your time. I just want to thank all of our hosts again. I want to thank all of our attendees. I really want to thank Joanna and Susan and all of the volunteers who are on the call who make many of these results happen. We are done. We're going to stay on the Zoom for a few minutes so that people can finish having questions answered in the chat. We're going to give you a few more minutes to donate. But that's it. Thank you, everybody.